Good evening. My name is Vita Morgan. I am the Senior Director for Engagement, Diversity, and Opinion at the Courier-Journal. Welcome to our panel discussion on Breonna Taylor and her far-reaching impact. Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician, was killed by police 1 year ago in her own home in South Louisville. Her killing incensed communities all over the world and sparked protests and cries for racial justice, with many people, including celebrities, sharing the hashtag #SayHerName and demanding action. Since then, Taylor's face has graced billboards, murals, and magazine covers. And in cities across the country, legislators are invoking her story to turn bills into laws, many banning no-knock search warrants, like the one Louisville police obtained before bursting into Taylor's home last year. Today, we discuss Breonna's impact, the changes that we've seen and those that are yet to come. Joining us for our discussion today are Bianca Austin, Breonna Taylor's aunt, who has, along with her family, fought for answers and for justice in her niece's case. Attica Scott, a Kentucky state representative who in 2016 became the first Black woman elected to the Kentucky legislature in nearly 2 decades. Keturah Herron, a policy strategist for the American Civil Liberties Union in Kentucky and a social justice giant and a change agent. And Amy Hess, Chief of Public Safety for Louisville Metro Government, overseeing 4 departments: fire, emergency services, corrections, police, and she also previously served as a special agent with the FBI. Welcome to all of you, and thank you all for joining us. I will have some initial questions for our panelists, but then we will also take questions from viewers. So please don't hesitate to use the chat to ask questions. I'd like to start with Bianca. Bianca, thank you so much for joining us. I cannot begin to imagine what your family, what you have gone through over the past year and even right now. Can you talk a little bit about what you've gone through and just your message for people who all over the nation have been fighting for justice in Breonna's name?
Well, it's definitely been an emotional roller coaster this past year. Granted, with everything going on, I think me and the family is still right where we're at, 1 year ago today. So we still have a lot of questions. We're still angry. We're still out here fighting for justice for Breonna, just trying to get some type of answer and just trying to make sense of it all, trying to make sense of what happened the night of March 13th.
Any message for those people who have been out there fighting alongside and all over the nation for justice?
Oh man, like the message is like it's much needed, like it's greatly appreciated. The message is to keep going, keep applying pressure. We really need this in our communities. We really need laws to be changed to work in our favor. And the time is now. I just feel like if we give up now, we'll be right back where we was, 400 years ago. We're happy that people are using Breonna's platform to make real judicial change and giving back to their communities and just seeing that the difference that needs to be made and take place. So,
thank you, Bianca. I know that one of the people who's been out there, fighting and marching has been Attica Scott. And Attica, you've been out there protesting, and you even got arrested out What is it about Breonna Taylor's case that has moved you to action, and why do you think her case has captured the nation the way it has?
That's a question for me to answer for other people. I can speak for myself as a state representative, and I do want to, because it's History Month, lift that up, that there are only 2 Black women in our state legislature, Representative Colonel Pamela Stevens and myself, Representative Scott. And it is something that tugged at my heart as a mother of Black children. I have a Black daughter, and this is about community and family. As a legislator, it's more than about legislation. It's about the fact that I navigate in community with people who've been crying out justice and had looked to me at the time as the only Black woman in our state legislature of 138 members as someone who could provide some policy guidance and direction. So I can speak for myself and say that this has pulled at me as a mama and as a person who's deeply rooted in community. I would hope that other people have found their own reason to show up for justice and to literally put their bodies on the line and their lives on the line seeking justice for Breonna Taylor.
I understand your daughter is also out there as well, and that she has joined the fight for justice. How does that make you feel as a mother?
It's important. She's the reason why we were out there that second day of protest on Friday, May 29th. We saw what happened on that Thursday, and she looked at me and said, "So we're going out there tomorrow, right?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And we did. And so much love to young people like her, like Travis Nagy, Chris Smith, Tyler Girth, all the young people who we've lost since then and who have faced violent policing since Friday, March 13th, 2020.
Thank you, Attica. Speaking of just keeping the conversation on Louisville, Amy, I'd like to bring you in next. It really feels like Louisville has just really turned upside down. Just so many changes. Can you talk about how Breonna's death has impacted the city?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. So for one thing, I look back over this past year, and I got to say, obviously, nobody saw the events of 2020 coming, first with the pandemic. And then as we got into the city's response to that, I was actually, of course, overseeing one of my departments, the emergency management. And that alone was something that everybody was coping with in their own way, and what we saw throughout the world. And then, of course, moving into the racial justice protests after the death of George Floyd, and of course, with Breonna Taylor. And as we saw that at the end of May last year, you think back to where we were just a year ago, even as the onset of COVID, and you realize that things are never going to be like that. It's never going to be pre-2020 again, and that's a good thing. For one thing, what I have seen from the city's perspective over this past year is this past year has made people, I think, much more aware of different perspectives, different views, and important social justice topics like the things we're talking about here tonight, equity and really the inequities that have occurred for so long and over time. And I think that for one thing, from the city's overall perspective of that, their awareness of that has grown so much and so significantly. When I think about just people, randomly making comments or being aware of these things now that they weren't aware of just a year ago. And then within public safety, certainly, the police, I didn't have responsibility for oversight of the police department until just 3 days into the protest. And the cabinets were realigned in the mayor's office. And it was an educational experience for me to see their transition over time and their awareness of how to really adjust to the events of 2020. And so we've seen a number of things happen particularly with respect to policing reform, but really with respect to what needs to be done well beyond policing.
Thank you for that. And I'll come back to you too about some of the changes that I know there's so many of them that are happening with the way policing is going in Louisville. But I want to bring Keturah into the conversation. Some activists have argued that Black women have been left out of the Black Lives Matter conversation. Attorney Ben Crump has stated that what happened to Breonna will change that. He said, and I quote, "There has been an awakening now that Black women's lives matter too." And Black women have definitely been leading this movement. And Keturah, you've been a major force as well. Can you talk about what it's meant to see a Black woman getting this level of attention?
Yes, thank you for that question. And it is definitely a topic of contention and a topic of contradiction. I think that it's amazing that Breonna Taylor has been getting the attention that she has, and that you saw all 50 states protesting. We saw 18 different countries protesting, calling for justice for her. But it's also very unfortunate and heartbreaking that it had to happen in her death. And I think that when we talk about Black Lives Matter and Black women mattering, we have seen at the inception of this nation the treatment of the way that Black women have been treated. I think it was Malcolm X said that Black women are the most disrespected person in America. And so I think that it's only right that Breonna Taylor, the acknowledgement and her story is out there, and that other Black women are being recognized. But I don't want it to be seen due to police brutality. I want it to be seen in the greatness and excellence and the way Black women has always held this nation down. And so again, it's just a bittersweet moment. And I think that if folks really look back historically at civil rights movements and moved at all different points of the nation, Black women have been leading that work. And so, this isn't anything new, but I am happy for Bianca and Miss Tamika, that everyone knows who Breonna Taylor is. However, we have to continue to fight and make sure that these things do not happen to other Black women in our communities. And it's so important. I know that we'll get to and talk about policy, but it's so important that we do keep going and we still keep pressing on. And this is really the beginning of a long journey ahead. And so, it's I say it's a contradiction of Black women getting notarized right now and the reasons why that's happening.
That's a good way to put it, a contradiction, indeed. And I want to go back to Bianca. Bianca, the family has taken on a major role in pushing for changes. What would you say has been some of the most important changes that you've seen, and what else do you want to see happen?
Over the past year, I'd say, a lot of people have just really been made aware of, of Louisville Police Department. Like from March 13th, we experienced a police force that was very unprofessional to begin with. Our main focus now is to focus on police reform. People are starting to realize the corrupt practices and patterns um, that are done here in Louisville. And they continue to do it. They continue to show it. It's just like they do not care, especially with our new police chief coming from somewhere that had Atlanta just being controversial, and then coming here to where the tragedy of Breonna Taylor and her not addressing the issue. It's a problem for us, and it concerns us. We're worried. We have a lot of questions about police reform. Why they don't get drug tested and alcohol tested when they're involved in all these high profile cases. You know, there's no transparency in LMPD. They have not expressed or shown any type of transparency coming out of the police department. So, I mean, as far as changes as that goes, we haven't seen any. You know, like we're still waiting to sit at the round table and discuss what can we do to move forward. As far as community, I mean, these people have been out here on the ground working, you know, trying to get the laws changed, like Breonna's law, the no knock law. Very important law. And, you know, people, we need to, that is very important. And there's also other laws that we can look into that's on the ballot that can help move forward to hold these police accountable for their behavior. So it's we definitely have a lot of work to do. So, but just over the past year, like community-wise, just getting out here, coming together, teaming up, building resources, building, you know, groups and just having each other's back, you know. So it's very important that we all stick together. And it's more important that, you know, that LMPD start to show a little bit more transparency in the work that they're out here doing, and not make us feel like, yeah, that they don't care. Because right now it's feeling like they don't care. So.
Thank you, Bianca. Amy, I want to go back to you just to talk about some of the transparency issues that Bianca just raised. How would you address that and the changes that we're, you know, seeing right now with police?
Yeah, hi. So first, I'd say that, you know, obviously the awareness that these things needed to change, that was an important part of 2020, is that policies need to be revisited on a regular basis. Training needs to be revisited. Culture needs to be, you know, looked at in any public service organization, and particularly with the police departments. I think the first overarching question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we want to be policed? What does public safety mean to you? I mean, and so as we think about that, how do we involve the community in that? Because that has to be part of the conversation. It can't just be government saying, well, this is how it's going to happen. It has to be, for lack of a better word, co-produced. It has to be community saying, this is how we want to be policed. And for the police department to be listening and also advising part of that process to say, here are the benefits and the risks from our point of view. And for everybody to be able to have that conversation is so important. You know, there's a lot of things that have been done since last year, and a lot of things have been listed out before, but and not one of these is like the salvo, the cure-all for all issues, but each one contributes. Breonna's law contributes on the local level. We've obviously seen that be passed, and of course the pursuit of that at the state level and in other jurisdictions continues. But we've also seen, for example, things that like the drug testing that was mentioned. You know, something I didn't realize is that it was actually random drug testing actually was in the prior collective bargaining agreement and in LMPD policy, but it wasn't done on an annual basis. It was just random drug testing. And then, you know, you think about, well, how do you implement random drug testing on an annual basis? The problem with that is, what if you test somebody in January, then do they know they're off the hook for the rest of the year? So in trying to think through, how do you implement, you know, policies in a smart way that really is in keeping with the intent of that particular issue, and all of those things we've got to be able to have conversations about, so that we do it in a smart and efficient and effective way. But you know, the Hillard-Heinz report that was just produced, again, not a cure-all, but at least it did do, I think, a really good job of identifying a whole bunch of areas that could be better, that could incorporate more community input in the process. And it outlined a whole bunch of areas, whether it's use of force or whether it's early intervention systems or whether it's the preparation of search warrants, a lot of different areas to look at and make recommendations. And I think it was about 102 recommendations, as I recall, from that report, 155-page report, that now LMPD is responsible for incorporating and implementing, and how they're going to implement it. And in addition to, of course, the settlement agreement, the things that came out of that. So there's a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different parts of reform that have been taken on over the past year. Even things like policy changes that could be happening without the need to change the collective bargaining agreement. Things like the tear gas policy, it has to be approved now by the chief or the chief's designee, usually the deputy chief. That wasn't a thing before last year. And so it brought things like that to heightened attention, and the settlement agreement brought many other things to heighten attention to make that happen. So I think we've got a ways to go, but policing is an ever evolving profession, and it should be, because we need to continuously ask ourselves how we want to be policed.
But you feel like you are being more transparent, especially with all these changes. I mean, 102 different fixes in there. You feel like you are addressing the issues that Bianca raised about transparency? I
think that yes, but what people aren't seeing yet is that. So first off, I would like to remind everybody that Chief Shields just got here. She's been here like a month and a half, and she is of course diving into many different issues and things that have happened here over not just the past year, but years of the history of the LMPD, and prior to that, the Louisville Division of Police, Jefferson County Police. And so years of policing and what's happening in the rest of the country too. But the idea is, in moving forward, to be able to report on the implementation of, for example, the Hilliard Heights recommendations, to provide regular progress reports, and do that in a very public way, to be able to update not only Metro Council, but the public, be able to post it on the website or in whatever ways we can, they can get that message across. Here's the actions that are being taken, and try to be as transparent about that as possible. Here's what's happening as far as the policy changes that have occurred. I think it is really important for people to hear that, and for media to help to get that message out.
Thank you, Amy. We talked a little bit about Breonna's loss. I want to go to Keturah, because Keturah, you spearheaded passing Breonna's law in Louisville. Talk about the impact that's going to have, and then talk about policy change in general, and why it's important to push for policy changes.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that when we talk about the impact, we've already seen, here in Louisville, the ban that LMPD will no longer be able to use no-knock warrants. And I remember a couple of months ago, there was some situations that I saw on the news where there was a hostage situation. I think there was another one where someone was wanted, and you saw police actually talking to the folks inside the home, and the suspect was apprehended and there wasn't any harm done to anyone. So I think that when we talk about the impact, I do think that we have already seen some of that. But also when you look at it in a broader way, we've seen across the nation that other jurisdictions are now taking up their own versions of Breonna's law. And so that, as someone who does policy work, that makes me hopeful, and it makes me know that impact is already there. The issue with policy is oftentimes it takes a long time to get the correct policy solutions. And then also you won't know the outcome of those policies until another incident occurs. And so, we were able to pass Breonna's law locally here. It was either 16 or 17 days. But I think that the long-term impact of these pieces of policies, I don't know that we will actually see those immediately until another incident happens. But I think that when we talk about police reform, I think that local jurisdictions can do everything. They can put these practices in. They can change policies within the department. We can change policies and ordinances at the Metro Council level. But at the end of the day, until we as a nation and as a state look at the bigger picture, of the Police Bill of Rights, and we also look at qualified immunity, that's where the change is going to happen. Because if we create these policies and there's really no hard accountability, and police are still protected by things, then if an incident happens, we are back at the same point as far as departments saying, well, there's not anything that we can do because police officers still have that due process. And so, you know, one thing that as a policy person that I'm looking forward to seeing is how do we really attack the qualified immunity and make sure that police are actually held accountable when there is misconduct. And I think that overall that has been very difficult. I am very, you know, we've got a long way to go. I think that we're in the beginning stages of that. I also think that it comes down to FOP contracts. I also think it comes down to the way we're spending dollars in the city. And so there's things that the police department itself needs to do, but there's also this larger picture of reform and policy that needs to happen in order for us to really get down to the root of the issue.
And that, I think, really takes us to the state level. And I know we had lost Attica. Are you back on the call? Because I wanted to talk with you, Attica, about where we are at the state level and how the Kentucky General Assembly has responded to Breonna Taylor's death. Okay, looks like we don't have Attica back on right now. So let me see. We do have a question, though. A question here. It looks like it's for Amy. How do we ensure that police reforms are actually enacted? Seems like some of the same police reforms were announced previously, but never actually put into place. No accountability. So how do we make sure that they're actually enacted?
Yeah, so a couple things is that one is I think public statements have gone out multiple times, I know from the mayor's office anyway, about things like, for example, Breonna's law and the change in the use of body cameras, body-worn cameras, as well as the way search warrants are done. Those have been made very public, and then as far as additional changes, as Couture was actually just saying, unfortunately, some policy changes require a lot more than just changing an internal policy. Some require changes in legislation. Some require changes in collective bargaining contracts or agreements, union contracts. Some require, you know, other types of changes. And so I think as we move forward, some things take a lot longer, and it feels like those things aren't happening fast enough. It's not that they're not happening; it's just that they take some time. On the other hand, then you see things like, for example, the Civilian Review and Accountability Board that was just announced. The nominees were announced this past week, and so that's a big step forward, you know, for the city to have a Civilian Review and Accountability Board. But right now, a perfect example is subpoena power for that board. How does that work? And currently, we're seeing two pieces of state legislation that are essentially trying to address that issue and how that would be enacted. But it does require a change in state legislation to make it happen. So to that point, there's a lot of conversation about it, and a lot of that information is out there. Sometimes I feel like there's so much out there that you get lost in what's actually happening, and you don't realize how much actually is occurring. But many of those things are in progress, and so therefore it doesn't feel like those things have been accomplished just yet.
Okay, and just one other question, Amy, while you're here, that just came over. Have the FOP negotiations begun, and will outside observers be allowed? How can citizens make the voices known on the Police Bill of Rights?
As far as the FOP negotiations go, yes, those have begun, and that's there's several different contracts. I think actually the city has like 20 plus different contracts with different city employees. In the police department, there are multiple contracts, one for officers and sergeants, and one for lieutenants. and captains, even though there's no captains, but at any rate, there's different, and they expire at different times. And so right now it's the officers and sergeants is the contract that is being negotiated, and those are in the very, very preliminary stages. Currently, because of the way things have been done in the past, the ground rules were set that those are not open to negotiation, or I'm sorry, open to the public for outside observers. However, when it's presented after the negotiation to Metro Council, that is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what the discussions basically have been about, or what issues that the public might have. And so that's the path that's currently being taken. As for the the Police Bill of Rights, to weigh in on that, and I think it was already addressed by Keturah as well, is again, to be involved in letting your representatives, your elected officials, know your thoughts and opinions about things like that. That's really, really important, to be able to say and to understand actually even what the Police Bill of Rights is. A lot of people don't even understand what it is. To do some research, to take the time to understand it and to look it up and to read it and to say, this is not okay, or I didn't know that was what it was involved. And so to be able to take that and then to voice your objection or support or whatever it is to your elected official is the democratic process. That's obviously what's needed.
Thank you, Amy. Keturah, I want to go back to you because you talked about how we need to make changes, like, at the state level. Can you talk about, the efforts to do that, or, what are the roadblocks there, I guess? What's been the holdup?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anytime that you start talking about issues at the state level, it definitely makes things more difficult. There's 120 counties in the state of Kentucky. And so if we're talking, one of the things that I've heard legislators talk about, if there's an issue impacting Louisville specifically, sometimes it's hard to make the case for the other legislators to get on board with that. However, we have this year seen Senate Bill 80 that was proposed by Senator Danny Carroll, and that is a police accountability bill, as I would call it. And it does look at some of the issues that we have talked about. There is a piece in it that looks at a duty to intervene. So it would make sure that if a police officer witnesses their partner or coworker doing some type of misconduct, that they would have a duty to intervene in that. And so it has some other provisions in it. So I think that this session we did see a little bit, but I do think that we have to do a step further. And I think the beauty of all of this is that this is the very beginning stages of folks really talking about changing policing in this type of way. And so I think that for one, this past session was a short session, actually not past, we're still in it, but it's a short session. And so what I would recommend folks to do is once the session is over, during the interim is what they call it, from the time the session's over to it begins again, is to build coalitions, to talk to your folks who represent you, and demand these changes. I think that Kentucky is in a very a good space and spot. The nation still has their eyes on Kentucky. The nation's going to continue to have their eyes on Kentucky. And I think that it's our job as leaders in this state, it's our jobs as citizens to make sure that our elected officials are doing some co-governing and listening to the community and making sure that the things that the community wants to make things safer for them is implemented. And the people have the power to make that happen. And so I look forward to seeing what we'll be able to do.
Breonna's law that, is passed here in Louisville, we don't have a Breonna's law at the state level. I know Attica Scott has proposed a Breonna's law that really, hasn't gone anywhere yet. Other states have a Breonna's law. How does that, where do we go with that? How does that fill up with Kentucky?
Yeah, so today, House Bill 21 had a hearing in House Judiciary, and then Senate Bill 4, which was President Stiver's bill, was also heard and actually had a vote. and Representative Scott had some amendments that they talked about making to Senate Bill 4. So it sounds like, and it looks like that we will get a version of a no-knox passed this session. One of the calls to action for people to do is to call their representatives, call leadership, and also lift up that at this point in the game, that piece of legislation is not called Breonna's Law. And I think that we have to make sure that we do that to make sure that we continue to honor her and keep her legacy alive and people not forget what has happened to her. And so, this politics are crazy and very interesting. And so, what I would say is for folks to definitely start making those calls now. But I think that what we saw in today's hearing, some of the things that some of the things that weren't in Representative Scott's bill, I think that they will be able to be added in Senate Bill 4.
Good. Thank you so much. Want to bring Bianca in, Bianca, because again, I know your family's been fighting, and we have Breonna's Law, here in the Louisville, but not in Kentucky. Talk about how you feel about what's happening at the state level with changes in Breonna's name.
I'm excited. Whether Attica Scott still gets presented or whether it's Cyber's bill, I think both are really good bills. I think they both will be effective and helping that there won't be another Breonna. I think it's a good thing.
What do you want to see? What do you think her legacy will be? Breonna's legacy will be. I mean, what do you want to see happen?
I think Breonna's legacy would be she's going to be the person who brings us all together and make real change. Because that's what she did when she was here. So she's the one. She was the glue to the family. She kept everybody together, sane, motivated. So hopefully her legacy will live on in that way.
Thank you, Bianca. I want to go back to Amy, because it looks like there's a question here. Is anybody monitoring the courthouse responses now involving police? Is this the responsibility of the Civilian Review Board?
If I'm not 100% clear on what we're talking about, as far as the courthouse responses involving police.
Yeah, it says stop rubber stamping. The other part says stop rubber stamping police in court actions.
Okay, maybe we're talking about search warrants, and there was an issue about, I think several issues. One is that several proposals about whether or not it's legible, the judge's signature is legible. That's something that I know has come up before, and most recently, I believe the Administrative Office of the Courts actually changed the form they're using so that, and again, this is, I think, a great example of, or at least a good example of people voicing their opinions about things like this to institute policy changes, what can be changed at a local level. And you realize that, a policy change, which is something as simple as okay, now you have to print your name on a form. I mean, that goes to transparency. It goes directly to transparency. But if it hadn't been for people voicing their opinion of that might have not have happened. And I think I heard recently that there may be some type of legislative changes or some other type of changes that are controlling over the judicial branch that would implement changes such as how search warrants are processed by a judge, or whether or not those interactions with the police in a judge signing a warrant should be recorded in some way. I know that there's been interest in that as well, and those are the types of things that would obviously require a change in law and the way that things are done. And so once again, I think that goes to how people can participate actively participate in the conversation and what's happening today and take action.
Thank you, Amy. Keturah, a question for you. One of the things about this case that people seem to still hold this false opinion, and we get people calling and writing, letters to the editor. They have this false opinion that Breonna is somehow, a criminal or involved in criminal activities, though there were no drugs found. She has no record. Why do you think it's been so hard to overcome these perceptions?
Well, thank you for that question. That's a big question. First, I want to go back to what Amy said. Also, just to let people know, in Senate Bill 4, there is a provision in that piece of legislation that says that judges do have to print and sign their name on the warrant before we'll address the issue. And as far as the question asked, that is what we have seen in society. The media oftentimes has a job of vilifying, especially folks. And one thing that I would say to people who want to talk about if they were doing or not doing something, at the end of the day, Breonna Taylor did not deserve to be killed in the manner in which she was killed, no matter what her activities was doing, things that we may know and things we may never know about her. The law and what our society says about justice, we say that everyone is allowed to, in front of a jury, appears to answer to accusations, and she was not given that opportunity. And so I just think that is just a way for folks to be nasty and rude and disrespectful. And to me, I think everyone, there in America, we have seen that there's two different justice systems, one for Black people and one for white people. And the thing that we have to get to and know is that no matter what, I don't care what someone's doing, they have a right to go to trial. If there's some type of accusations against them, and they have a right to bring witnesses or whatever. And so to me, vilifying is an easy way out. It's unnecessary, is disrespectful and hurtful and harmful to families. And for me personally, that's just not something that I really tolerate. And I challenge people to really take a deep look into themselves when they talk about victims in that type of way.
Thank you for that, Keturah. Another question for you. What other policy reforms do you think Louisville and/or Kentucky need to consider in the coming year?
I think the main thing that we need to do specifically as a city is to really take a deep look at how we're spending. Before the pandemic hit in 2020, we saw that there were libraries closed. We saw that there was pools closed. And we have to really get to how we are showing up for people in the community, how we're taking care of people's mental health. What is our education system looking like? How do we make sure that everyone has opportunity for gainful employment? And so I think that some of the things doesn't necessarily have to be actual pieces of policies, but I do think that some of the things can be practices. And one of those things is how are we spending our dollars? What is our value? And how are we valuing people? And Dr. Dawson Edwards, Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards, her and I had a recent conversation, and she brought up the concept of community safety versus public safety. And I think that we have to really take a deep dive and realize what it means to have community safety, and really making sure that people in the community have their basic needs being met. We have so many people who are houseless and homeless right now. We have so many people who are faced with addiction issues. We have, it's just so many things that we can do. And so it's not just a policing issue, but it's an overall issue. And I look forward to seeing what we can do. And we are going to be coming up on elections in 2022. And so I think that, it's time for us to really get creative and imagine the community that we want. And it's going to take all of us to do that together.
Thank you, Katura. Amy, question has been put in the chat for you, and you've talked about it some already, but what other steps is Louisville considering to increase transparency and accountability? So what steps Louisville is considering?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, again, I think that, like, if, for example, right now, as you've been speaking, I went to the louisvilleky.gov website, and I just typed in under the news section, police reform. And there's over 50 communications that have come out from the mayor's office over the past 9 months about police reform. And so, if people, aren't seeing those, then clearly we need to figure out how to get that message out there more and better in other ways. And I recently heard, some criticism about, for example, lack of community involvement in the police chief search or the Hilliard Heights review. And I haven't been part of both of those processes. Both involved significant community surveys that were conducted. There were over like 8,000 responses to the Hilliard Heights review in that survey. And as far as listening sessions, listening to a whole variety of people involved in that. And then also, I think it was over 300. And then also in the police chief search, over 10,000 survey responses from the public, and also about 126 participants in those listening sessions. What was disappointing, frankly, from my perspective, in being involved in those, was that we sent out multiple requests for participation, and unfortunately, I got less than, many instances, 10% responses. And so how do we improve that? How do we, I don't want to hear from the same zip codes every time. How do we increase the participation? How do we get that involvement? And of course, this past year was unfortunately very difficult to reach people because of the restrictions with the pandemic and with COVID. It just made it worse. But that's not an excuse. We've got to do better. We've got to make sure that people's voices are heard when it comes to developing this, this version of public safety that we need to move to as a society, this version of policing that we need to move to, that we want. And I would say that, what I mentioned earlier, the Hilliard Heights report, if people aren't hearing about what progress is being made or what the status updates are on that report within the next, couple months, I think people should be saying, hey, wait a second, where is that? I absolutely should be holding government accountable, the police department and the mayor's office and city government accountable for what happened to those 102 recommendations, and I want to know where we are on them. That's something that is a necessary and instrumental part of government and government services and government transparency.
Thank you, Amy. I want to ask you the same question, Amy, that I asked. What do you think Breonna Taylor's legacy will be for Louisville?
I think, like I started this conversation about, first off, I look back and even within local government, is we were dealing with the pandemic. On March 13th was actually the day that we had established our command post, our emergency operations center, we call it, for COVID. And unfortunately, nobody really in the emergency management realm at that point knew who Breonna Taylor was. And now the world knows who Breonna Taylor was. And they know about her through the efforts of the people on this discussion and through the people of the city and through the people who have been pushing for racial justice throughout this past year. And the reforms, while it might not feel like that much is happening, if you really take a step back and look at all that has happened over this past year, there is a ton of work that has gone into addressing the things that were highlighted and heightened by the events that were prompted after the tragic death of Breonna Taylor. And if you look at that and you look at it from a distance, you realize that that is an amazing legacy that she will have, an amazing impact she will have. And not just, and which is amazing in itself, a law being named for her, not only here, but in other cities, in other states, in other jurisdictions, but just the level of awareness that things do need to change, that policing should not ever stay stagnant and should change and evolve with the way that the community wants to be policed. That's the legacy of to be able to not just reform policing, but to reform society and go broader and see that basic systems of government and culture and awareness need to change. And that's what at least I see from my view.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Keturah, I want to ask you that same question about the legacy. What do you see as her legacy?
I've often struggled to answer this question, and for me personally, that what I have seen is just the way that she has been able to galvanize and energize people, and make people know and understand and believe that we all have to be engaged. And I think that that's what we saw last year. Obviously, there'd been a lot of organizing and teaching that had been happening for years, and it was just the right moment. But I think that what she did, especially for the younger generation, is showing folks that we have to be engaged and involved in our processes in our communities. And then I think that just, honestly, what I think that last year and the murder of Breonna Taylor made the nation admit how racist our nation is. And I think that for me, that is what I see as her legacy is that she has shined this big light on the elephant in the nation that nobody had wanted to talk about and no one that wanted to address. And so now you see not just police departments or not just cities and elected officials, but you see folks in the medical field, you see folks in education, you see all of these different people who are talking about what does it mean to be anti-racist, and what does it mean to take down and knock down the barriers of white supremacy. And I think that without a shadow of a doubt, as I'm speaking about it, I'm getting chills right now. Without a shadow of a doubt, I think that that's what Breonna Taylor's legacy is.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Keturah. Bianca, I want to go back to you. I mean, you've heard all of the comments about the legacy of Breonna, and I know this weekend people are gathering on Saturday to mark the 1 year of Breonna's death. What would your message be to them? And just hearing all of this, how do you respond to it?
The message would be to hopefully just remind people, why we out here fighting in the first place, and that is to put these police officers accountable. Just get back on the straight and narrow. I know it's been a lot of distractions, but definitely been a long year, a long fight, and we still got a lot of fighting to do. Hopefully we're still not, fighting this fight another year from now. We want to be able to see the changes in the policies and, the things that we've been working so hard for put into place. Until that happens, we want the city of Louisville to take some type of responsibility for the death of Breonna Taylor, because it shouldn't have happened in the first place. But also, just tell people, to keep going, just keep the faith. It's motivation for our family to see people out here on behalf of Breonna every day, making sacrifices from their families and jobs. And, stuff. So it's definitely their hard work does not go unnoticed, and we appreciate it. So this March 13th, this weekend, we want to get out here and make some noise. Just let everybody know we're not going nowhere. And Breonna Taylor, Louisville is Breonna Taylor. So
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate you taking your time and giving us your insights as well. And I would ask you, and thank you to all who tuned in too, please join us next week at 5 p.m. when we will hear from youth activists who are rising up and letting their voices be heard in this fight for racial justice. And until then, thank you for joining us and have a good night. We really appreciate you.
thanks for having us.
Thank you.